Dr. B. Collins, news and comment. It's Tuesday, May 26, 2020. I'm back from the long holiday break, and as I reported to you last week on Thursday, my partner Kathy had rotator cuff surgery on Friday. I spent the day shuttling back and forth to the hospital. And so I have been becoming a caregiver, and it's quite an experience. I run the ice machine. I do all the cooking and cleanup, and I've learned new skills like hair brushing and installation of barrettes. And if I can put this without being seen as sexist, like most guys, I'm pretty familiar with helping a woman undress. But helping a woman dress, especially when she has her pitching arm, her right arm, in a sling, is complicated. So I am developing new skills here late in life. And I have to say that Kathy and I are both novices at the surgery thing. We have been profoundly lucky getting to the Medicare stage of our lives without any serious medical, surgeries or other hospital stays. And so I have been developing new skills. I can put it that way. So as a result, I'm spending less time here at the office and studio. I am going to reduce the scope of my daily research to save a little time, and so the podcasts are probably going to be a little shorter and focused on fewer stories until home life gets a little bit back to normal. So on Friday, Trump issued another one of those narcissistic, megalomaniacal decrees. And this is the guy who first said that he would tell the states when to reopen, that he had the sole authority, and when even his friends and staffers said, no, Don, you don't, and then they advised him politically, you're better off to let governors make those decisions so you can tweet criticism. And even when Georgia became the first to so-called reopen, Governor Brian Kemp was the target of tweets from Trump saying, I think it's too early. Well, now every Democratic governor is a foot tracker. And with a look at the political map, with a look at his slide in the polls with evangelicals due to his bungling of the pandemic as it approached and rolled out, including the new studies last week that some 35,000 people might not have died as we approach the 100,000 grisly mark, had we taken action as a nation, even a week or two earlier. And, of course, there was never any coordinated federal response, just those lengthy press room performances by an angry man on a daily basis. So late on Friday, Trump decided to pull a fast one. And he went to the press room and he announced, or maybe it was in the Rose Garden, I don't really know, but he announced that he is ordering the governors of the 50 states to fall in line and immediately allow religious houses of worship to reopen. And this came totally out of the blue. We know that the White House fussed with the CDC, delayed the release of the guidelines for reopening because of concern about the language used that we can guess was restrictive about reopening, particularly the Christian churches in the country. And so Trump made this decree that is based on nothing. And in some states, they did hold religious services with some crowds. I don't know the exact number from here to there. But Governor Gavin Newsom, who has really made it a practice trying not to confront Trump, he responded in this manner. He said on Friday, we'll roll out our own guidelines on Monday. And he did on the Memorial Day holiday. And he basically deferred to county officials. He set broad guidelines that the limits in a given church or temple would be 25% of the fire chiefs, the regulations regarding occupancy, maximum occupancy of a specific building. And in any case, no more than 100 people, and they have to wear masks, limit singing, no hugging, none of that Catholic, exchange of hugs or handshakes. No collection plates can be passed. And you cannot share a hymnal or a book of Scripture. But, for example, in Los Angeles, which is where 60% of the cases and the deaths in California have occurred, even the Catholic Archdiocese is saying, well, we're not in a hurry, and we want parishes to celebrate Pentecost this coming Sunday by holding food and blood drives. But some of the evangelicals are very aggressive, and they seem to feel it's a test of their faith to defy the public health officials and guidelines and just see who gets sick or see who dies. And we have anecdotes from across the country of these angry Christian pastors, a couple who have died as a result of their blatant disregard of the guidelines and, in some cases, orders that had been issued. And the Reverend Amos Brown here in San Francisco, he's a Baptist, often quite a fundamentalist kind of guy. He said, we're not going to be rushing back to church. Freedom of religion is not the freedom to kill folks, not the freedom to put people in harm's way. That is insane. And I have to ask, why people of deep faith continue to be buffaloed by Trump? I mean, after all, after he ordered the churches open, what did he do? He went and worshiped at his local Trump golf club. I know he at least went out one day. I think he was out Saturday and Sunday this weekend. And that roughly approximates, I'm an agnostic, but I was trained by the Jesuits as a Catholic. And Catholics practice the Stations of the Cross. And there are these 15 descriptions of the crucifixion of Jesus and the resurrection. And that roughly, is equivalent of 18 holes of golf for Trump. And he continues to operate in a way on Twitter that you would think is it flies in the face of his own self-interest. So there he is on Memorial Day, trash tweeting Connor Lamb, a veteran, a conservative Democrat who grabbed a Republican seat in the Pittsburgh area and who's up for re-election, and Trump is endorsing his opponent. That's pretty routine. But he couldn't even spell Lamb's name correctly when he was busy trashing a veteran on Memorial Day. And he continues to go way off the rails about mail-in voting. It's like he picks a Democratic governor or Secretary of State to attack on a daily basis. And most people recognize that this is just an effort to preserve the Republican voter suppression tactics that have worked. They clearly made a difference in Wisconsin and Michigan in 2016 in his favor. And I really have to ask people of faith why they continue to support a man who is grossly hypocritical, who has led a life that can be described as immoral, whether it's the way he conducts business or the way he treats women and he's on his third wife. But in his commentary on Friday, when he ordered the churches open this Sunday, he almost said, God damn it. He could not resist pandering. saying that he's declaring churches to be essential because if abortion clinics and liquor stores are essential, then churches certainly are. And the idea that faith has to be practiced in public, that it has to include gatherings of other souls in order to lift up their voices to God. I mean, this is so tribal. And it just defies logic. So the other thing that Trump has lately really amped up about is that he wants a huge crowd at the relaunch of Trump 2.0, the Republican convention now scheduled for late August in Charlotte, North Carolina. And he's hammering away at Roy Cooper, a conservative Democrat, because he's unable to guarantee that the party will be able to fill up the arena there with his supporters. And Trump is saying, look, we're ready to drop millions to remodel the arena to allow more people in there. And is this some form of a deadly loyalty test? That in order to salute your Führer, that you have to risk contracting a virus and possibly dying? In order to demonstrate that you'll put your life on the line for this guy? I mean, he has no competition. He hasn't signaled that he's ready to replace Mike Pence. This is a total rubber stamp convention. It is just his narcissism and his need to feed it that drives this whole effort. And, of course, he's trying to set an example that he has vanquished the coronavirus and that everything's going to be fine. And there's some back and forth here where he appeared to talk to some of his insiders about moving the RNC to his sprawling club in Miami, the Doral. But he said, the ballroom there isn't even big enough to get his ego and his hair in the house. So these are such petty moves that trivialize the office, the nation, trivialize the contributions of veterans like my dad, who we honor on Memorial Day. And it just takes us to this new low. And, we continue to scratch our heads and say, how low will we go? So I'm happy to report that we have a new grant recipient from the Peter B. Collins Podcast Community Fund. I chipped in some money. Listeners have chipped in direct money for this program. And all of the subscription revenue since mid-April has been building up in the community fund. And the latest grant goes to Fred, who was referred to us by Natalie in Arizona. Natalie Fredrickson is her name. And she describes Fred as an old friend who's having money challenges at this time. He lost his job. He's been a driving instructor, a former teacher, and he has a podcast. I took a look. And Fred, next time you post a podcast on Fred's front porch, drop me an email because I'd like to check it out. I didn't find any recent ones on the site. But I'm happy to, we sent the money via PayPal to Fred. He's already got it. And I can do the same for you or someone you refer to because we have funds and we are accepting grant applications. All you have to do is email Peter at peterbcollins.com. We have yet to turn down a request and explain the circumstances like Natalie did. And we will be happy to help people out. We recognize that $100 only goes so far. But for a lot of people, $100 can make a difference between having food at the end of the month when money is extremely tight, stretching the dollars until the next Social Security or retirement check comes in. So we're here to help, and I encourage you to come forward if you or someone you know could benefit from our community fund. Well, I hope that by now you have listened to my very important interview with Scott Ritter, where we discussed the Mike Flynn case, and he changed my mind. As you know, I had been denouncing Flynn, saying, look, he's an idiot. He was a spook. He knew that his phone call with Kislyak was intercepted. But Scott Ritter laid out the origins of the Flynn investigation. It was called Crossfire Razor. And the main investigation into Russian meddling in the 2016 election was Crossfire Hurricane. But the Razor file was aimed at Flynn because he had attended that celebration dinner for RT, Russia Today, the Kremlin propaganda network. And that one picture with Putin set off all kinds of alarm bells. Now, we also know, and listeners have reminded me, that Mike Flynn ran the DIA, the Defense Intelligence Agency, when a report was produced predicting the rise of an Islamic State. Son of a bitch, there was the rise, and they even called it that. And that, many people speculate that's why Mike Flynn was persona non grata in the Obama administration and was drummed out. And they felt that he was a useful target. If you want to follow the scenario that Scott Ritter laid out, to try to restrict or bring down the incoming Trump administration. And simply by, making it about the Russian ambassador, it fed the whole low information, high propaganda narrative of Russiagate. And so the New York Times, which I consider, along with the Washington Post, the twin major promoters of the Russiagate narrative, there are some cracks that are appearing. Now, I'm reading between the lines to some extent. But in Saturday's Times, Charlie Savage, who's a decent reporter, he took the twin news developments that in a bizarre jumping of the hurdles, a federal appeals court is ordering the trial judge, which is Emmett Sullivan, to explain why he hasn't already dismissed the charges against Mike Flynn at the request of the Bill Barr Justice Department. And also on Friday, the FBI Director Chris Wray announced that he's going to run one of those famous FBI investigations into the FBI. The ones that always turn up no wrongdoing by the FBI, including, quote, to determine whether any current employees engaged in misconduct and evaluate whether the Bureau should change any procedures. Now, to be fair, the FBI apparently doesn't have the authority to investigate past FBI employees, including a director named Comey. But that, I guess, is just a footnote. So Charlie Savage quotes a Stanford criminal law professor, David Sklansky. It's unusual to ask a higher court to direct a lower court to do something before the lower court has had a chance to make up its own mind in the first instance, and that includes whether to dismiss a case. So that part is very unusual, and, I want to be clear that Bill Barr is a highly political critter who is working hand in glove with the Trump re-election team to stage what I consider to be the unraveling of Russiagate before our very eyes over the next few months. And we got Giuliani with Ukraine. All this stuff is falling into place, and it's not accidental. When Trump labels it Obamagate, a lot of people just put on their blinders and their earplugs and say, oh, that's absurd. Well, Trump is an absurd figure. But it doesn't mean that the FBI didn't collude with the intelligence agencies to set Trump up for a fall. And that Russiagate, as I say, is based on leaks, anonymous sources, evidence that was not visible to the public, and a whole lot of innuendo. Rachel Maddow, The Times, The Post, CNN, They all stoked this without any critical counter coverage over a couple of year period. Then we got the Mueller report, and these news agencies have not acknowledged the false reporting that they presented. So, with that, listen to what Charlie Savage gets into the New York Times Saturday edition. After the review by the prosecutor Jeff Jensen from St. Louis, who'd been assigned by Bill Barr, the department disclosed to Flynn's attorney several documents used to portray the client as a victim. Many experts in criminal law have disputed the notion that he was treated differently in any legally meaningful sense than countless other people under investigation. Now, some of that is true because the FBI has set up and knocked over tons of people, including the Muslim American cases that we focused on with reporter Trevor Aronson. Back to Savage. The disclosures included notes by a former FBI senior official musing about whether the goal in questioning Flynn was to get him to tell the truth or to get him to lie so he could be fired or prosecuted. It also disclosed materials that show that James Comey, then the FBI director, violated bureaucratic etiquette by dispatching the agents to interview Mr. Flynn without going through the office of the White House counsel. Now, twice, the Times here invokes bureaucratic protocols. But the other way to read it is that it was part of a setup. Back to this article. The review also disclosed internal FBI files showing the Bureau had been about to close the investigation into Flynn specifically, having not found evidence that he was a Russian asset. And this is the central argument of Scott Ritter. They were about to close Crossfire Razor when the information about the phone call with the Russian ambassador was leaked to the Washington Post. All right, here comes another reference in the Times to simply a bureaucratic issue. Because the Flynn investigation was still open as a bureaucratic matter, the FBI agents used it as a basis to ask Flynn about his discussions with the ambassador. And this is the tainting of the investigation. This is the technicality that I believe Bill Barr is basing his request for dismissal of the charges on. Now, it is a technicality. This is highly political. There's no doubt about it. But the underlying information, in my view, is leading to the unraveling, the crumbling of the entire Russiagate narrative. One more quote here from the Savage piece. Before Mr. Barr's intervention, the Justice Department had also portrayed the interview as separately justified by and material to its umbrella investigation into Russian election interference. And then a couple of pages later on the opinion page, Bret Stephens, who is a major Zionist, he's the former editor of the Jerusalem Post. He's a man I almost never agree with. And he published a very interesting column entitled Michael Flynn and the Presumption of Guilt. And he takes you back to the Republican convention in 2016, Mike Flynn's speech with the lock her up chant. And he quotes him from that speech, "If I did a tenth of what Hillary did, I would be in jail today." And Stephens, who's not sympathetic to Flynn, refers, as I often have, to the $530,000 that Flynn took to lobby for the state of Turkey, and he was not a registered foreign agent. That broke the law. Stephens said, if Flynn had been prosecuted, judged, and sentenced according to his own moral arithmetic, he'd be behind bars today. But then he says every thoughtful observer should have learned two things from the experience of the Trump administration. That few things in politics are as despicable as efforts to use the power of the state to criminalize a political opponent. That's why Trump's efforts to bully a foreign ally, he's talking about Ukraine, into digging up dirt on his domestic opponent was so reprehensible. That's why Trump deserved impeachment. The second he says is that civil liberties matter. never more so than when a government seeks to prosecute the people it dislikes by hiding exculpatory evidence, using deceptive methods, relying on outdated laws, or threatening them with financial or familial ruin. And then Stevens uses a sleight of hand here. Instead of using his own voice, he shifts to a column by Eli Lake published at Bloomberg. And I haven't seen it because of the paywall at Bloomberg. This has been obscured by the fact that he twice pleaded guilty to a crime he likely did not commit. Okay. It's obscured because some of the sensational reporting about him that once appeared solid later turned out to be dubious. Well, I make that case about Russiagate. And Bret Stephens later here, as you'll see, actually hints at the same about Russiagate. What, he asks, after all, is the supposed case against Flynn? There's the claim he undermined American interests by urging the Russian ambassador not to expel American diplomats in Russia. But that was a request in the service of American interests, not against them. There is, he says, alleged lying to FBI agents about his conversation with the Russian ambassador. But the Bureau's record of the interview shows that agents thought Flynn did not give any indicators of deception. There is the suggestion that Flynn exposed himself to Russian blackmail by supposedly lying to Mike Pence about the call. But then he quotes Lake again to take the onus off himself. Perhaps it was Pence who lied because he was asked a question he found difficult to answer on national TV. And he addresses the guilty plea. Flynn, like so many defendants in the U.S. justice system, pleaded guilty to avoid having a different charge thrown at him and his son. Against all this, consider the behavior of the FBI. In December, the Inspector General noted that the Bureau repeatedly misled the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Court in its investigation of Russian collusion. The FBI withheld the transcript of his call. We've never seen it. It didn't ask him direct questions about his conversations with Pence, though the rationale for the interview is to clear up supposed discrepancies between the record of his call and Pence's comments. So this really, I think, is the thread that we need to see pulled on. And the New York Times needs to face up to its failures. And what I consider to be the intentional use of yellow journalism to attack a man who I think is despicable. And I'd love to see a way to remove Trump. I'd love to see him defeated in the fall, even though I have no confidence that Joe Biden can do it. And we are left with an American public that is divided. Half of the people are going to buy into the Trump-Obamagate scenario. And I see it on Facebook, where the people who supported Hillary, the people who believe in Russiagate, are continuing to embrace a deep form of denial. And if and when this does unravel in the manner I suspect, it will simply embolden Trump. The media will be further diminished. The fake news label will be increasingly effective. And we all lose. And where did this start? Because the Democratic leadership couldn't face what was seen as a loss by Hillary Clinton. They had to blame it on somebody. I want to recommend a piece that I got around to reading over the long weekend. It was published on May 20th at the Gray Zone Project under the byline of Ben Norton. And this is an excellent piece of investigative journalism. And it focuses on how The Intercept took a secret source and her secret document and exposed her. Reality Winner is now serving more than 5 years in federal prison. And she wasn't released on a compassionate basis due to the coronavirus, like Paul Manafort, Michael Cohen, and some number of others with the right political connections. So what we learn here confirms what John Kiriakou and Joe Hickman told us in an interview at least a year and a half ago, that Matthew Cole, who remains on staff at The Intercept, Piero Midyar's so-called independent media outlet, and it does offer some good reporting. You hear me quoted on a regular basis. And their marquee writer, Glenn Greenwald, who, by the way, I don't think has anything to do with the Reality Winner case, and he's got a good alibi. He's in Brazil, and he's not part of the day-to-day operations of The Intercept. But what Ben Norton, who used to write part-time for The Intercept and had an email account there, what he discloses here is that Matthew Cole teamed up with Richard Esposito to write the series of articles based on the leak of classified information by Reality Winner. And Esposito is now the chief spokesman for the New York Police Department. And when he joined the NYPD earlier this year, all kinds of people came out of the woodwork to praise their friend of 30 years. And Esposito has held high-level jobs at ABC, where he participated in the exposure of John Kiriakou. Then he went to NBC, and he worked with Matthew Cole at both of those networks. And apparently it was Cole who recruited Esposito to work on the reporting when they got the leak from Reality Winner. And it was either Cole, I think it was Cole, but perhaps facilitated by Esposito, who went to government contacts to, as they later explained it, confirm the authenticity of the leak from Reality Winner. Well, in confirming the authenticity, the watermarks on the page and other indicators that spooks could see led them to arrest her, even as the first Intercept report was being published. It is the stinkiest of burning of a source. And John Kiriakou is widely quoted in this article. They also identify Sam Biddle, who remains on the roster at The Intercept, as one of the people who participated in this really bad journalism, if that's what you can call it. They show that Sam Biddle was quoted in his critical comments about WikiLeaks and Julian Assange by none other than Mike Pompeo when he was at the CIA. So this is a piece that I really encourage you to read. And when you see how cozy Esposito is in the national security / law enforcement arena, that he's a good friend of this fellow John Miller, who was called a journalist, and he did some of the reporting on Ed Snowden that ran on CBS 60 Minutes before he jumped to work at the NYPD. And Ben Norton says, this history raises the question, are Esposito, his longtime friend Miller, and other frequenters of the revolving door actually independent journalists or PR flacks for the cops? And why would The Intercept, a publication that markets itself as publishing fearless, adversarial journalism that holds the powerful accountable, collaborate with one of U.S. police agencies' closest allies in the media? So I encourage you to read this and tuck it away in your memory. Because Reality Winner, I believe that the document she leaked was relatively trivial. But the way she was set up and knocked down is something that should haunt those reporters for a long time to come. Here's today's COVID-19 update, edited by Linda Lewis with my gratitude. We now show 347,000 deaths worldwide attributed to COVID-19 In the United States, it's creeping up on 100,000, 98,371 as of today. And if you saw Sunday's New York Times, the entire front page was a list of the dead with their age, location, and one line, sometimes just 3 or 4 words about that individual. So it was, I think, heart-wrenching for a lot of people to see it. The other thing I'll note, just as an observation, I read through the entire list, and what stunned me is that it is predominated by people over the age of 75. And we know through the, huge tally of deaths that have occurred in senior care facilities and nursing homes. But it has just been devastating to the elderly in this country. And also African Americans disproportionately have died from this due to really the stunning long-time limitations of access to health care. Coming from the University of Washington, where they have created some of the models, they are now suggesting that there could be somewhere a total for this year of somewhere between 350,000 and 1.2 million deaths related to coronavirus in the United States. Now, let me take back the part about this year. That seems to be a fairly open-ended timeline. They write, in the whole of the United States, there were 30,000 to 35,000 deaths from flu in the first 2 months. This year from COVID, we have more than 100,000 deaths. Surely this is a different beast that we are talking about. That's attributed to Dr. Anirban Basu, director of the Choice Institute, the University of Washington. He said, as of right now, among the cases who fall sick, we're only reporting about 25%. And we've been around with the data before. People who are trying on an interim basis to manage all the numbers and say they're too high, they're too low, and to say when you compare it to the numbers of cases, which are now at 1.6 million reported in the United States, that is inflated by testing. And so it is hard to get a handle on the actual mortality rate. But the raw numbers are pretty stunning. In Brazil, 807 deaths from COVID-19 in the past 24 hours, up from 620, compared to U.S. numbers of 620 in the same period. So we are trending down in deaths and hospitalizations. But over the holiday weekend, there was so much activity of people in close contact with others, not observing the social distancing, hanging out on the beach, splashing around in swimming pools. We saw the activity, if you did watch on TV, at the Lake of the Ozarks and many other recreational spots around the country. So give it a couple of weeks, and we'll see if the virus has, declined in its ubiquity, or if these people made a serious misjudgment. The World Health Organization will temporarily drop hydroxychloroquine from its global study into experimental treatments for coronavirus due to the safety concerns. We don't know if Trump ever used it, or if he lied about it, or if he has ended his course of taking that drug. We have a real problem to organize food distribution to where it's needed in this country, and it is shaping up to be as haphazard and hodgepodge as the distribution of personal protection equipment and, of course, the other medical supplies that have been in such short supply during what appears to have been this peak of the pandemic in the United States. Linda titles this one, Grifter's Gonna Grift. A former White House aide won a $3 million federal contract to supply respirator masks to Navajo Nation hospitals in New Mexico and Arizona just 11 days after he created a company to sell the medical gear. Zach Fuentes Trump's former deputy chief of staff secured the deal with the Indian Health Service with limited competitive bidding and no prior federal contracting experience. But I'm sure he had a positive reference from Crown Prince Jared. So that continues. And I want to note one other item that Linda sent me separately. Under the fog of the pandemic, a Senate committee secretively passed a bill, which was last Friday, to give Israel a minimum of $38 billion over the next 10 years, despite the ongoing devastation to the U.S. economy. It now goes to the full Senate. It's already been passed by the House of Representatives, so it is a virtual certainty that that will continue. And my final item today is to recommend that you invest about 45 minutes and watch a video that I'm about to play an excerpt from. Jimmy Dore, I think, is well known to many of my listeners, but I watch him occasionally. He produces shows so often it's hard to keep up. And he's nominally a comic, but he has become very political. He's extremely well informed. He's very passionate. And he's a critical thinker, not just somebody who is critical. And in this exchange with Matt Taibbi and Katie Halper on the Rolling Stone show, it's called Useful Idiots, he just rips away. And I have to say that many of the things that he focuses on are things that I have brought up or offered my views on, but in a much milder way. And the biggest takeaway from watching Jimmy Dore is that I've been way too easy on the Democrats in the House and the Senate, mostly related to the CARES Act, but also the so-called HEROES Act that has been passed by the House and was written by Democrats under Nancy Pelosi. And just one item is this $38 billion giveaway to Israel with nothing in exchange. And it's not based on the health of the U.S. economy. There's no concern about the borrowing required to pay for it. And Jimmy Dore just rips into the Democrats, including Bernie Sanders. And I have to say that what Dore has to say is just right on. It is very accurate. So let's just listen to the opener here. And if you follow the link in my show file to Rolling Stone, you can jump to about 50 minutes into the piece. And I want to thank John Zwiebel, our dedicated listener in Hawaii, who tipped me off to this. And I found some time over the weekend to watch it. Here's Jimmy Dore.
But so that's what we got to get to, because there's a lot of pain and suffering being caused by this. And by the way, our government and the oligarchs use this crisis to loot the metaphor Dylan Radigan used on my show was, let's think of the United States as a car. And your car broke down on the freeway and it's out of gas. Everybody knows you want to put more gas in it. Instead, what the government did was they came in, they stole the tires and ripped the radio out of it. And they left it without gas.
Right. Yeah.
And that's what we're living through. And I see, I don't know if you've experienced this, but when I watch other news, people have no idea what's coming or what really happened. They have a vague idea it wasn't good enough yet, and they still think we can fix this. They have no idea that the government, that the country has been given over to rapacious oligarchs, and our country's not going to look the same coming out of this ever. And the people who were supposed to do something about this and step on the brake pedal and sound the alarm did not do that. And this was their moment. And I keep seeing news people say things, they're treating the CARES Act like it was just another vote, instead of what it really was the biggest upward transfer of wealth in the history of humankind. And it will remake this country forever. and people have no idea what's coming. We're going to have a permanent underclass. We're going to have permanent long-term unemployment. We're going to have states reducing services because people can't afford to pay taxes, and states have to balance their budgets. And we have a bunch of rapacious oligarchs live in Washington who aren't going to help us. And we have a bunch of progressives who we thought were going to fight for us who are rolling over at nuclear speed inexplicably with not getting a goddamn thing back. At least Mitch McConnell, you know what he's getting. What the fuck is the squad, Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren, getting? They're getting nothing except invitations to parties.
Okay, this is that area.
So if that is enough to induce you, Jimmy is profane. He is amped up. He's not as gently spoken as I am, but he's telling the truth. And particularly when it comes to Sanders standing down in the middle of this campaign in deference to his good friend Joe Biden, who doesn't have what it takes and is leading most Democrats, in my fearful view, over a cliff. And he doesn't go easy on Bernie. And I think it is quite well deserved. Thanks for listening to today's News and Comment podcast. You're free to share it all over the place. You'll find it on YouTube. And I remain Peter B. Collins.
Happy trails to you until we meet again. Happy trails.